Okay, thank you so much, Alex. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. So good morning or good afternoon, depending in the place where you are now. And thanks for being here for this webinar. I'm Miguel, and with me I have Antonio, that is a researcher in our team. And let me start by saying that it's an honor for us to have the opportunity to share at an SPR webinar the work my team and I have been developing at the University of Minho in the past 12 years, studying from a narrative and dialogical perspective the processes of change in psychotherapy. We have three topics. So we'll discuss first the concept of innovative moments, and then we'll go for ambivalence and ambivalence resolution. I will present the first topic, and Antonio will present the second and the third. We will stop at the end of each of these topics so we can discuss with the audience. But anyway, if you think that, if you think that, Alex, perhaps if there is too many questions, you can stop me, even if I am in the middle of the topic one, okay?
Okay, for sure.
Okay, so let me start with the concept of innovative moment. As you will see during this presentation, this concept is central in our research, and it was from this concept that we developed the other related concepts as ambivalence and ambivalence resolution. I would like also to emphasize that innovative moments were developed in a bottom-up strategy from clinical data. We began this line of research with a small project in which we interview survivors of marital violence, trying to find exceptions or unique outcomes, to use the formulation from White and Epstein, in their lives. Unique outcomes are narrative details outside the influence of what White and Epstein called the problematic self-narrative or the problematic pattern. As you will see, this idea of exceptions in relation to a dominant problematic pattern leading to psychological suffering is also a central assumption in our research. Despite their stories of intense suffering, a wide variety of unique outcomes emerge. Moreover, we observed that unique outcomes didn't seem to be homogeneous. Some seem to have more power to promote change than others. These differences between unique outcomes were clear in terms of complexity, proximity or distance from the problem, and so on. And it was from here that we developed typology, and I will come back later to this. So the second step was applying this typology to entire treatments of narrative therapy of women victims of marital violence, and we called all the sessions. The same types of unique outcomes emerge without any need to change the types or create new ones, and the pattern of change emerged from here. So in the first study, we only did interviews, one interview for each participant, and then we applied the same typology to psychotherapy sessions, to the entire treatment of narrative therapy. So we found from the first study 5 types of innovative moments, which is the empirical operationalization of unique outcomes, and we termed these different innovative moments: action, reflection, protest, reconceptualization, and performing change. And later on, we differentiated, in a study with emotion-focused therapy, we differentiated 2 types of reflection, which we called reflection 1 and reflection 2, and 2 types of protest, which we called protest 1 and protest 2. I will come back later to this typology, as you will see. As an aside, in the first studies, we refer to this concept as unique outcomes, respecting the term from White and Epstein. But as we apply this coding system to other models of therapy, we decided to use a new generic term, not so close to the tradition of narrative therapy, that could be understood by researchers and clinicians from different traditions. Okay, so as I was saying, we start coding different samples to see if we could apply the same typology and also to see what patterns would emerge. As you can see here, this summarizes the main samples that we studied: emotion-focused therapy, client-centered therapy. These two samples were collected in York University, and this was a collaboration with Leslie Greenberg and Lynn Angus. And then we collect our own samples: narrative therapy of depression, cognitive behavioral therapy of depression, and constructive therapy of complicated grief. As you can see, we have a problem, which is the size of the samples. They are very small. As coding IEMs is a very demanding and time-consuming task. And until now, we have been coding all sessions of each treatment, which implies that with these small samples, we have now more than 500 sessions of therapy coded. And secondly, in some of the samples we use, in all the samples we use two coders, but in some of them we use two coders coding the entire set of sessions, which is really heavy in terms of work. I will discuss later on alternative strategies we are using now to deal with this problem and to try to replicate our studies in bigger samples. Let me now just go back to the concept of innovative moment before discussing the main findings. Okay, we assume that a problematic pattern or problematic self-narrative is dominating client life at the onset of therapy. The problematic pattern may be characterized by implicit rules of meaning, as the one in the slide. This is an example from depression, and an implicit rule could be something like, I should always give priority to others' opinions and feelings. Operationally, we try to formulate a list of problems that characterize the problematic pattern to search after that for IEMs. We assume that the problematic pattern is maintained as congruent occurrences feedback into the pattern. That is, as congruent feelings like feeling neglected feed the problematic pattern, the patterns becomes more dominant. And this is also true for other occurrences, thoughts, for instance, thinking that our own value is reduced compared to others, relationships, for instance, being submissive towards others, and actions, for instance, doing what others think is relevant, and so on. We also assume that alternative patterns are in the background as dominated voices in the self. Okay? So, in therapy, we observe and stimulate the emergence of different forms of actions, feeling, thinking, and relating. And we believe that this is common to all sorts of psychotherapies, since therapists are interested in promoting change. And different here in this context mean incongruent with the problematic pattern. As these different forms emerge, they contribute to challenge the former problematic pattern. I will show you a schematic example now. At some point, an alternative pattern pops up in which a new set of rules are evident. Often, these rules are discussed in psychotherapy, as the problematic implicit rules are turned explicit and challenged, and alternative ones are constructed. The main point is that the emergence of congruent feelings, now congruent with the alternative pattern, congruent thoughts, behaviors, and relationships further expand and consolidate the new alternative pattern, and the problematic pattern is now in the background. Okay, so you can imagine examples of what could be congruent feelings, thoughts, behaviors, and relationships with the new emergent rule, I should respect my own needs. Okay. Sorry, I think I forgot something here. Okay, no, okay. So, okay. One simple example of this could be the statement here. My life is a misery. I feel depressed all the time without the strength to do anything. I do not have any pleasure in living. For me, life is a burden. And we would see this as an expression of the dominant pattern, the dominant self-narrative, okay? But if the client adds the sentence that appears in the slide in red, stating, curiously, yesterday I had some pleasure playing with my son, and it felt good. And I am occurs, as this is an event that is at odds with the previous problematic pattern. So in a sense, given the dominant role of this pattern, we may say that IEMs are low probability events. There is now a new voice, voice 2, okay, associated with innovative moment, that opens up new possibilities of meaning making. That is, if the meaning present in the second statement is elaborated and expanded, a micro-transformation occurs in the self. We'll discuss this expansion of new meanings in a few minutes. But before that, let me say, just as a brief note on dialogical processes, that we may describe these processes, and we have been doing this effort, we may describe this process at two different levels. The narrative outputs that are observed in the client's discourse, or the dialogical processes that are inferred in the client's self. When the dominant pattern is dominating, alternative voices are silent. A set of autocratic and similar voices dominate the self, and we may find rigidity and lack of diversity. When change emerges, alternative voices are heard, and dialogue and diversity between voices may be observed. Now let me return to the different types of IEMs. So as I stated before, we started identifying 5 types of IEMs: action, reflection, protest, reconceptualization, and what we call performing change. And now we have a different set of IEMs, as I will show you here. We have 4 different types of what we call level 1 IEMs. I will explain briefly what that is. And I will show you some examples so you can make a sense of this. Okay, so the main idea is, oops, sorry, I have this animated. We can see the examples here, and the main idea is that these IEMs facilitate the creation of distance from the problematic pattern, but are not enough to create change by themselves, okay? So we have here action 1 IEMs, and as an example, I went to the gym for the first time. Reflection 1 IEMs, as an example, I need to take better care of myself. And what we call protest 1 IEMs, that the example here is, that's enough, you can't criticize me anymore. So these forms of IEMs allow the client to create some differentiation from the problematic pattern, creating distance from it, okay? Then we have level 2 IEMs and reconceptualization that we now like to think as level 3 IEMs. Regarding level 2 IEMs, we have action 2, which was former what we call performing change. And these are, the example here is, I'm planning a party with all my friends for my birthday. Reflection 2 IEMs, as an example, now I don't worry as much about what others think. And protest 2 IEMs, which the example is, I have to stand up for myself. I am entitled to make my own choices. This usually emerges as assertiveness and forms of empowerment. So our suggestion is that these types of IEMs, level 2 IEMs, are the ones that contribute to the emergence of a new pattern. And finally, what we call reconceptualization. As an example you have here, now I am much more confident because I gave up the need to be perfect. And typically, reconceptualization emerged in good outcome cases and developed until the end of the treatment. So the main idea is that these level 2 IEMs allow the alternative pattern to be developed. Let me add some more about this. So you have here the 3 levels. I won't go in much detail regarding coding. We have some papers on this, so you can check if you want, but mainly level 1 IEMs allowed creating distance from the maladaptive framework, and they represent elementary forms of reacting to problems. While level 2, you have some elaboration of the alternative framework, and usually these emerge as new learnings, new strategies, and contrasts, positive contrasts between a past self-facet and a new emergent one. And finally, level 3, which is main reconceptualization. We have integrating what changed and how it changed. And we have 2 components, which is a contrast in the self, a positive contrast in the self, and also some transformation that allow this contrast to emerge. Okay, so to make things more complicated, we have on measures, we have different types of different sorts of measures. We are trying to simplify this, and I will explain you what we are trying to do now. But mainly, we have 3 levels of IEMs, as I stated before, with different types, in the globally 7 types. And let me just try to make things a little bit easier, saying that usually level 2 IEMs are contrast, positive contrast in the self, in which the person say, before I was something, now things are pretty different, no matter what this is, okay? And then process, which describes how the person believes he or she is making a difference in their lives, okay? The reconceptualization, what we observe in reconceptualization is an articulation between these 2 components, contrast and process, okay? So we have former studies in which we have 5 types of IEMs, the former ones. We have studies in which we use, more recent studies, 7 types of IEMs, and we are now turning to make things a little bit more simple using just 3 levels of IEMs, okay? The measure that we use in terms of IEMs is not frequency, it's proportion. And we measure proportion if we are working with transcripts, we measure proportion, calculating the percentage of words that the IEM occupies compared to the entire session. But we are now also using video, so we are using proportion from video, using time, okay? So if we have let's imagine that we have a reconceptualization IEM of 5 minutes and the session is 50 minutes, that means the measure will be 0.1, okay, 10%. Then we have measures of reliability, and we use 2 types of reliability, which is for proportion, we use percentage of agreement, and to differentiate different types or levels of IEMs, we use Cohen's-Key, kappa, okay? Okay, the studies that we have been doing with this typology, we have been doing single case studies, both qualitative studies and quantitative studies, sometimes mixed with qualitative data and quantitative data. We have been doing also studies with small samples, as you see, the samples that I referred before, mainly in 3 types of designs. The first one, the most simple one is comparing IEMs, the emergence of IEMs in clients with pre-post outcome measures like back depression inventory, for instance. Then we had longitudinal designs in which we use generalized linear models, or HLM, in which we use session by session outcome, and also, of course, session by session IEMs, because we have measures of IEMs for all the sessions. And finally, we have studies in which we compared IEMs with other process measures. Recently, we published a study with the CCRT. I will summarize the results from this study later on. The CCRT is the core conflictual relationship team. Now let me turn to the main results. Okay, I will make a short break in a while. So, summarizing the main results, we can say that good outcome cases, or recovered cases if you prefer, had a higher proportion of IEMs, and I am referring here to the global measure of IEMs, all the IEMs together, no matter if we are working with 7 types, 5 types, or 3 levels. Then level 2 IEMs are more typical of good outcome cases, and level 1 emerge more in poor outcome cases. And as I said before, level 3 IEMs emerge usually after mid-therapy and increases until the end in good outcome cases, but are almost absent in poor outcome cases. So this is what we have typically been finding in different studies. We have some particularities in different samples. For instance, in emotion-focused therapy, there is a lot of protest IEMs that occurred in shared work, but the 3 features that I highlighted here are congruent in all the samples studied so far. In our studies, in the studies that we used longitudinal designs, these researches are more interesting than average of IEMs in good and poor outcome cases. And the results from these studies suggests that IEM in one session are clearly related with measures of outcome in the following session, like the Yoki 10, for instance. And outcome measures in one session are related with IEMs in the following session, but with less statistical power. So these results, and we only have two small studies in which we studied these processes. These studies suggest that IEMs precede change in symptoms. This is interesting in narrative therapy. We did this with narrative therapy and also with CBT. This is interesting in narrative therapy, but one can argue that these results mainly support the idea of narrative therapy, that developing unique outcomes have a positive impact in narrative therapy. However, as I said, we found similar results in CBT, and here we can say that therapists are blind to unique outcomes or to IEMs, which make the results more interesting. Of course, these are very small studies, and we need to check in the future if the same findings are observed in new studies. Finally, a recent study with CCRT, using the samples from narrative therapy, CBT, and emotion-focused therapy of major depression that I referred before, allow us to compare relational narratives extracted with the CCRT method with IEMs. That is, we were able to compare 2 different narrative methods using very different methodological strategies. As you probably know, CCRT has 3 components, which the example here is to be loved and understood, response of others, rejecting and opposing, and response of self, helpless. This is very typical from depression, by the way. Moreover, an important variable from the CCRT is the rigidity of the pattern. For instance, a client that in 90% of his or her relational narratives wishes to be loved is assumed to be more dysfunctional than a client in which this wish occurs only in 30% of the narratives, because this means that the person is more flexible. The findings from this study suggest that the response of the self was a mediator between IEMs and outcomes. That is, we measure IEMs at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end of the therapy, and we also measure CCRT in the same moments. And IEMs at the beginning of the therapy predict CCRT response of the self in the middle of the therapy, which allows predicting outcomes at the end. In this sense, this suggests that in sessions changes identified by the innovative moments coding system may foster enough change in the interpersonal patterns that in turn contribute significantly to the symptoms recovery. Okay, let me just briefly highlight the limitations, some of which I already, okay, I don't know what's happening here. Sorry. Okay, now you can see the limitations. Of course, the main limitation is the small sample sizes. Another limitation is given that coding IEMs, it's so time consuming, we have using in different studies the same samples. For instance, we have the same samples studied for IEMs, ambivalence, and ambivalence resolution. We have also a problem with different measures used. We have studies with global measures of IEMs. We have studies with 5 types, with 7 types, and then with levels. And I have here 2 levels because at some point we consider reconceptualization as part of level 2. So in this sense, we can say that the insights from our research should be seen as exploratory, despite we have been doing this for a long time. We are trying to overcome these limitations, mainly with replication efforts. We are now working with a transdiagnostic treatment of emotional disorders. This is mainly a CBT-inspired treatment proposed from Barlow to depression and anxiety disorders. So we are coding now a sample of this treatment. And we are also coding only the 3 levels, not the different types. And we have been strategic sampling the modules of treatment because coding all the sessions is really heavy. Okay. Just a word on new applications. We have other projects, mainly with colleagues from other countries. There is an application to brief psychodynamic therapy going on Israel. We have a study using IEMs with university students under achievement in Italy. IEMs this tool has been applied also to vocational counseling. And we have now a colleague from UK that is trying to apply this to de-radicalization processes. And we are also trying to apply to practice using feedback strategies, very similarly to the ones that Lambert and colleagues use, but with process variables. And we are wondering also using these tools in supervision and training. So, Alex, perhaps you can have a break now.
Yes, maybe I would invite everyone who wants to ask a question, maybe directly to Miguel. You can raise your hand and I can give you the microphone. Or you can write in the questions tab in your dashboard and I can also read your question to Miguel. So let's just give a minute to see if anyone has any questions.
It was a lot of information, right?
So there is a question here from George that he wrote. And he says, I am sorry if I did not hear this aspect, but what is the public suitable for? What is the public suitable for technique? Let me see if I'm not completely sure. George, do you want to try to say a little bit more about your question to see if we can get it?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that what George is asking basically is that if there is any specific population where this kind of yes. So is there a specific audience for this type of coding system? Is that true?
In terms of clinical population?
Is that what you're asking, George? In terms of specific clinical population to use this kind of study? Yes.
Okay, I can just tell what kind of population we have been using this. Okay, so I am not sure, for instance, if this will fit well to personality disorders. I have no experience on that. Okay, so we apply this to. We began with psychotherapy with humans, women that were victims of partner violence. Okay. Then we apply this to depression, and we apply also this to complicated grief. We are now trying to apply to anxiety, and as far as I know, no problem occurred with the application to anxiety so far. So we assume, I don't know if this answers the question, we assume that these processes are common to different populations and to different forms of psychotherapy. Okay, that's our assumption. My main problem when I state personality disorders, the question is, before we code IEMs, we identify what is the problematic pattern. Okay, and we have been doing this. Just to give you an idea, we have been doing this. Hearing the sessions and trying to, usually we have two coders doing this, and consensually they define what are the features of the problem. Usually, so far, the features of the problem are what therapists and clients negotiate that they will try to change, in a sense, okay? So we are very close to the case formulation of these clients. But I can imagine that if we are working with a narcissistic patient, for instance, it will be more difficult to define what is the problem, okay? Because the vision of the observer on what is the problem, how can we operationalize the problematic pattern will be very different from the perspective of the client. So from my perspective, this is the main problem.
Yeah. So Miguel, you have two more questions here, and they are quite on the same vein. So Catherine is asking here if at this point there is any data linking therapist behavior with IEMs. And Vera also asks if you guys looked at therapist interventions that triggered the occurrence of IEMs.
Okay, so these questions are very similar. Thank you so much for these questions. This is a line that we have been that we have not been studying a lot. Okay, it's very difficult. We tried this several times to see. For instance, we began by trying to see if IEMs occurred spontaneously or if they were prompted by the therapist, and it's really mixed. Okay, so this is a line of work that we have a colleague here, and Antonio is been collaborating with Eugenia from our university that is studying collaboration with also with a coding system. But this coding system of the therapeutic collaboration, it's even more, in a sense, microscopic. Okay, so it's sentence by sentence. So we have one or two studies that we used this coding system of collaboration to track what occurs in terms of innovative moments, but it's it's not very well developed so far. Okay, so and we have, Antonio was reminding me that we have a study also with the system from Clario that we articulated and compared in emotion focused therapy what kind of skills from the therapist were related with innovative moments. Okay, but I believe that this is an important future line of research.
So, as there are no more questions, I think maybe we could continue on to Antonio, if that seems okay with everyone.
Perfect.
Hi, thank you, Alex, for hosting this webinar. Thank you all for attending. So let's go on with our presentation. So as the change process was becoming clearer to us, we started wondering about which processes interfere with change, specifically which events might preclude innovative moments progression from level 1 to levels 2 and 3. Looking back at previously identified innovative moments, we realized that two main different processes could happen. In a sense, innovative moments could be seen as developmental bifurcation points. On the one hand, innovative moments could be amplified. In the other hand, they could be attenuated. I will give you examples of both processes, beginning with amplification. I've been feeling differently last week, feeling safe when interacting with others. This is really new and strange in a sense. How do you think this occurred? I'm not sure. I thought about what we discussed last time, that I was applying old rules from my early childhood, and I tried to be less automatic when interacting with others. This would be a reconceptualization innovative moment. And I was able to feel it. It was strange because it was new. I felt really good. I thought that I didn't make sense to be hooked by my parents' rules and that I need to free myself from the past. I deserve more than what I had. This would be a protest subtype 2. So in this case, a reflection innovative moment was then followed by two different innovative moments. In a sense, we have a cascade of innovation, okay, that we could call amplification of innovative moments meaning. A different phenomena could happen, as in this example. I've been feeling differently last week, feeling safe when interacting with others. This is really new and strange in a sense. So we could have the very same innovative moment. The therapist could ask, how do you think this occurred? And the client might say, I'm not sure. Anyway, things won't never change. I'll be depressed forever. It's a curse. So this could be labeled as innovative moments meaning attenuation. When innovative moments are attenuated in their change potential, the problematic self-narrative or pattern re-emerges, and the change is blocked in a sense. We name these events in which innovative moments are attenuated as ambivalence markers. Here's an example, okay? I've been feeling less depressed this week, a reflection innovative moment, immediately followed by, but I feel depressed anyway, and this would be an ambivalence marker. So the client produces an innovative moment, but just after its emergence, also produces a return to the problem or an ambivalence marker. The reason why we chose to call these events ambivalence markers is because they mirror an oscillatory movement between two opposite positions of the self. So innovation and the problem. In a way, the production of an innovative moment frees the client from the oppression of the problematic self-narrative dominance, but it also produces anxiety, threatening client's sense of stability. This is, of course, an hypothesis. Thus, the client returns to the problematic self-narrative, reducing this anxiety, just to feel oppressed once again, okay? So, this was the starting point for a new research line. we reanalyzed the samples previously coded for innovative moments and looked for the presence of these ambivalence markers just after innovative moments emergence. We used the same samples and we used pretty much the same methodology, okay? So using generalized linear model, we contrasted the evolution or the progression of the emergence of these markers across sessions in good and poor outcome cases. And we have found that good outcome cases have less ambivalence markers and or in the good outcome cases, the presence of these markers decreases along therapy, which does not happen in poor outcome cases. In a second phase, we used a hierarchical linear model, which helped us showing that ambivalence is a stronger predictor of symptom change in the next session than symptoms are of ambivalence. So these are the main results we have so far. And these results should be looked at with caution because these studies share pretty much the same limitations which Miguel addressed for innovative moment studies. So we started focusing our efforts on increasing the N of our samples. To do so with the current methodology looks virtually impossible considering its time-consuming nature. So we developed a self-report measure of ambivalence in psychotherapy. Basically, we looked at the content of all ambivalence markers identified so far across different samples and problematics, and we elaborated a self-report measure composed by 19 items answered using a Likert type scale. This self-report measure is now validated for the Portuguese population, and we are currently using it in a feedback intervention at University of Minho. So basically, we are offering therapy as usual versus therapy with feedback on ambivalence. Still, we don't have any results. I hope this could be something we can speak about maybe in Amsterdam later this year. So I would suggest to make a break as I finished the main topic on ambivalence. I don't know if there are any questions, Alex.
Okay, thank you, Antonio. So if anyone now wants to ask a question to Antonio about this segment, please feel free to raise your hand on the dashboard or write the question. Let's just give a few seconds. And I think, Antonio, you may proceed, I believe.
Well, regarding going back to testing the impact of feedback intervention, I forgot to say that the feedback is given to the therapist, okay, about the client's ambivalence progression across sessions. And this is a way of addressing one of our main current goals, which is to bridge the gap between research and practice, okay? We've been doing a lot of research over the years, but still couldn't use it or make it useful for therapists. And this is why we are also concerned about studying ambivalence resolution, okay? As the persistence of ambivalence markers across sessions have proven to be negatively related with the change process, we developed a second line of research centered on how is ambivalence resolved throughout the therapeutic process. So we started by looking back at all the innovative moments previously coded, but only the ones which did not present any ambivalence marker. And then we analyzed their content, trying to evaluate whether they were or not involved in some kind of ambivalence resolution. Then, as a second step, we've tried to differentiate those coded as presenting a resolution process. So trying to find out if there were different strategies, okay? We have been able to identify or differentiate two different types of resolution. The first one is the escalation of the non-dominant voice or position and the consequent inhibition of the dominant one. This would correspond to a win-lose situation. Here's an example. I need to stop thinking about what other people say, okay, in the context of an assertiveness or lack of assertiveness problem. The second process is negotiation, okay? And in this case, the two opposite positions negotiate and engage in joint action. And this would correspond to a win-win situation. An example of this could be, their opinion matters, but also does mine, okay? Basically, we have tried to code these two different strategies across the different samples we have available, the same used for innovative moments and for ambivalence markers coding. And we have already some results, okay? Although this is a younger research line. So basically, and again, using GLM to understand the progression of ambivalence resolution markers across sessions, contrasting good and ProdChem cases, we found that escalation is the most common resolution across several types of therapies, for instance, narrative therapy, emotion-focused therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy. But in the good outcome cases, in the middle of the treatment, negotiation becomes more dominant than escalation, although in the ProdChem cases, the proportion of negotiation is very low across sessions. Recently, we have also conducted an HLM, and we found that only negotiation predicts ambivalence markers decreasing across sessions. These results are potentially interesting for practice and should be analyzed in greater detail. Although, again, we should look at those results with caution before new and bigger samples are analyzed. So I'm done. It's up to you now to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. So now we can open up for a larger discussion and question and answer. So I would invite anyone that has any question for either Antonio or Miguel about any issue regarding their work or related issues. Yes, Miguel?
Or suggestions also.
Or suggestions, yes, or what they should do next. You know, we can make a poll also. So anyone who'd like to ask something or suggest something? So Catherine Wright is writing, I understand this is a lot of work to do this coding. Can you give an example of how long it takes to code a session and how long it does to train someone?
Yeah, okay. Yes, we can, of course. We have now a program of training in which we can train a person in 1 week of intensive work, okay? So 1 week, working all day, it's possible to train the person in innovative moments coding and also ambivalence coding, because we have here 3 coding systems: innovation, ambivalence, and ambivalence resolution, okay? So for the first 2, we already tried, and we can do this in 1 week, okay? And the person becomes reliable, okay, at the end of the training. Regarding the coding, I'm not sure now how it's going on, because now we are coding, as I said, we are coding the transdiagnostic model from Barlow, and we are coding just some sessions from each treatment. And we are also doing the coding in video, okay? Video and audio, of course. So, and moreover, we are coding the 3 levels of IEMs. So we are using the types more as markers of the level of IEMs. So we code level 1, level 2, or level 3, okay? And this is much easier now. We know that for sure. It's much easier to have to speed up the process, and also to have reliable findings between 2 coders, okay? Because before, what happened was that coders could have the idea that they have the presence of an IEM, but one coder could think that this could be a reflection too, and another coder could think that perhaps this is a reconceptualization, and this increases the difficulties in terms of the coding and reduces reliability. Now with 3 levels, it's much more easier to get reliable results, and in a faster way. But when we use the 7 types, I monitored how long it took to do the coding, and it took about 1 month of full work for 2 coders to code an entire case, around 20 sessions. Okay, so this will be, if you want, perhaps around 1 session per day of work. Okay, I believe nowadays we can do this much faster. I'm not sure about this, but our aim is to spend, with 1 hour of session, spend 2 hours of coding. But I am not sure if this is possible yet.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions you'd like to ask to Miguel or Antonio? Maybe while we're waiting, if someone else has a question, maybe I can take the opportunity and ask you, Miguel and Antonio, if maybe you could tell us a little bit if there are some takeaway messages for the clinical side, if you did learn or rethink something about a clinical practice that might have come from your research.
Okay, I can tell you about impressions and feelings, okay? Not about empirical results.
Yes.
We have the feeling that people trained in this coding system, people are more sensitive to the emergence of innovation, okay? All the people that is trained in the innovative moment coding system, after a while, start seeing innovation where before they were blind to it. So, of course, I have no study on this. It would be an interesting study to see if training therapies to be sensitive to the emergence of innovation and to different types, different forms in which innovation can emerge, if this makes the therapist more effective or more responsive to innovation. I would like to believe that is true, but I'm not sure, of course. This is just what people that are being trained say about the impact of the training in their own practice, okay? It will be easier to study this in terms of supervision. Perhaps we'll do this in the future, to study using these markers in terms of supervision. Of course, I had not the opportunity to make this perhaps explicit enough, but level 2 IEMs, okay, level 1, it's the type of IEMs that you have the impression that something new is occurring, but it's not really enough. Okay, it's like I want to change. So sometimes it appears as in the forms of intentions, other times in the form of actions, but very reactive actions that could be, in a sense, trivialized after. And level 2 IEMs emerge mainly in two forms, okay? And they are very easy to track. The forms are what I refer as contrast. The person said, before I did X, and now I am doing whatever, or before I was feeling this way, now I'm feeling that way. You had examples here. Let me check. Okay, I think we have an example here, right, Antonio? Next time.
Just to tell you, Miguel, that we also have 3 more questions whenever you want to move on. But
okay,
please,
one. Okay, you can see this example here. I've been feeling less depressed this week. This is clearly a level 1 IEM, okay? But o grande, exatamente. Okay, but here you have clearly level 2 IEMs here, okay? So the first sentence, I've been feeling differently last week, feeling safe when interacting with others. This is really new and strange in a sense. This is what we call a contrast, because here clearly you have a contrast between a former way of feeling, thinking, acting, and a new way, okay? So this is clearly a contrast. And the other form that level 2 emerges is in the form of what we call process. And you have an example like here. Okay, let me go there, because I'm not so creative nowadays finding examples. For instance, would you agree, Antonio? This is a process.
Yeah, absolutely.
I need to stop thinking about other people say. This could be considered as a process. So the person is centered on the process to become different. Okay. So level 2 IEMs emerge in these two forms: contrast and process. And what occurs with level 3 is that these two components are articulated. So you can see it's really easy to differentiate it between level 2 IEMs and level 3. What I'm trying to say is that it's really easy to train therapists, I believe, trying to track when contrast emerge in the discourse of the client, or when process emerge in the discourse of the client. And moreover, I believe that typically when contrast emerge, most of the therapists, when someone say that something is different, most of the therapists would ask, how did you do that? And this prompts process. So intuitively, the therapists are trying to prompt what we call reconceptualization. Do you think I was clear, Alex?
I think so, yes. And maybe it even...
So,
yeah. It segues nicely, I think, if you wouldn't mind, because there are 4 more questions here.
Okay.
And there is one from Ana Villalobos, and she asks, how about the therapist's specific features or strategies to deal with ambivalence resolution?
Hey, thank you for the question. It is, of course, for us very important to address how therapists deal with ambivalence across sessions and how this impacts the evolution or the progression of ambivalence markers throughout psychotherapy. We have been doing that by coding the intervention of the therapist that emerges immediately after the occurrence of ambivalence markers, and then the response of the client. This is, of course, very demanding and time-consuming. So basically, we have chosen to do single studies analysis So this topic is progressing very, very slowly. But basically, we found two different possibilities that I will try to explain very briefly. So in some cases, in some poor outcome cases, what we would find was that the therapist would be too directive, in a sense that after the emergence of ambivalence, the therapist would privilege working on the innovation rather than empathize the return to the problem. So basically, the therapist would try, sometimes desperately, to stick to the innovation. So basically, challenging the client to keep talking about what was new rather than trying to hear his or her feelings about feeling ambivalent. So this would occur mostly in poor outcome cases. And this was one of the possibilities. In other and more recent case studies, we have found that studying the very same therapist working with two different clients, one good and one poor outcome case, the therapist would intervene in the very same way. So trying to balance support and challenge intervention. So being both empathic towards the problematic and the innovative voice or self-position. But then the response of the client would be very different. Whereas the poor outcome cases would respond by keep returning to the problematic position, the good outcome cases would move forward and go back to innovation. So this is a bit of a dead end for us because we are back again to client factors. So we are pretty much interested in keep studying how does the therapist respond to ambivalence, but also interested in potential client factors that might have a great impact on this process as well.
Thank you, Antonio. We have here 3 more questions, I believe. One is here from Dimitrios, and he or she, I'm sorry if it's a he or she, asks, is the new coding system with 3 levels published? Can we find it online?
Not yet, but if you read our paper with the same title of this presentation in psychotherapy research, I believe it's easy to find the same typology, because we talked about 2 levels, and the only difference is that we are now referring to reconceptualization as level 3. So in the paper, reconceptualization appears in level 2, but now we are considering the same IEMs in level 1 as in the paper, the same for level 2, except for reconceptualization, that is level 3. And this is related with recent studies that we have been doing, and that suggests that reconceptualization is better in terms of prediction of results than the components of level 2. As I stated before, reconceptualization articulates contrast and process, while level 2 IEMs is just contrast alone or process alone. And we have now results that suggest that the components together are better in terms of prediction of outcomes than the components apart. So that's the main reason.
Miguel,
we need to apologize readers for changing things, changing our coding system every year. But as I stated at the beginning, we are being guided by data, so we are changing things as new data emerge.
Miguel, sorry to interrupt, let me just remind you that we are currently watching your email account in case you want to switch.
Okay, thank you so much. No secrets, but anyway.
All the Portuguese secrets are now out for the SPR community.
Okay,
and
let me go.
Maybe while you are switching, I can also read you another question from Danilo. And
okay.
The question is, hi Miguel, greetings from Barcelona. You talked about good outcome cases as recovered cases, but what happened with improved but not recovered clients in terms of the emergence salience of IEMs?
Okay, thank you for the question. You want to reply to this one? Yeah, we have no data on that because we have been working with recovered cases, clearly recovered. So with reliable change index plus the return to the normative values in terms of the questionnaires that we use. And we compare this to unchanged cases. So we have no idea what occurs to, for instance, cases in which reliable deterioration occurs, or cases in which reliable change occurs without recovery. We have no information on that, unfortunately.
Okay.
But I can guess if you want. I can guess that the same pattern would emerge, but less extreme. That will be my guess.
Yeah. Diana also asks here, how do you define the start and the end of an IEM?
In terms of the coding?
Diana, would you like to specify? I can even pass the microphone if you are there, or if you'd like to write to specify a little bit more. Yes, let me see if I can put her on. Diana? I tried to activate her sound. I'm not sure if it worked. I'm afraid I tried to put your microphone on, Diana, but it seems that...
Okay, that's okay. The question was clear anyway.
Yeah. Maybe she... yes, Diana.
Okay. Hi. Well, I'm talking about the time. How do you specify the start and the end of the innovative moments in terms of time?
Okay. So basically, the starting point is, as Miguel explained, for the two coders to agree on a specific list of problems. And then we use that as a background to code innovative moments, okay? So basically, whenever the client starts speaking from the problems or problematic position and innovates, we do set the beginning of an innovative moment, okay? And then it's easy to define when it finishes because usually the customer clearly returns to what is his usual narrative. So basically, working with transcripts, we would define the word where it started, and then the word when it ends, and working with audio or video, the specific time.
So I have one more question here from Vera. And she asks, as I understand, you only code patient statements. At the same time, I believe as therapists, we often ask patients about these changes or point out the changes in thinking behavior we see, prompting them to verbalize the change. How do you understand this in terms of coding?
Actually, we do include therapists' speaking turns in our coding, specifically those that occur after the innovative moments emergence. As an example, if the therapist poses a question and then an innovative moment emerges, we would set the beginning only when the client speaks. But if this innovative moment goes on, as the therapist is prompting its development, we would code everything, including the therapist speaking turns, as an innovative moment. Because we do believe these events are a result of the therapeutic collaboration, so it would make no sense to exclude the therapist's interventions.
Let me add something that could help here, because you can have a question from the therapist prompting an innovative moment, and the person can refuse that. So this is not an innovative moment in terms of our coding. But if the therapist asks the same question and the client elaborates an innovative moment, as Antonio was saying, we start the beginning of the innovative moment with the sentence from the client. Mm-hmm. But then we include everything that happens until the end of the innovative moment. Okay, every clarifications, questions, and so on that the therapists use are included in the innovative moment.
Thank you. I think that was very clear, actually. So I'm wondering if there is any question or comment left. We still have time for one or two contributions if anyone wants.
Oops.
And also, if no one has anything to say, maybe Miguel Antonio, if you'd like to add anything, you also have the time for that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to insert my email here. If Antonio will speak.
Well, as I said, currently we have two main purposes. The first one is the replication of our studies to make sure the results we did share with you are robust enough. And the second path is to make our research clinically useful, okay? Which is actually the greatest challenge.
Yes.
We often get a lot of questions on how can we inform therapists, and we have been very conservative and very cautious in answering it. Also because we pretty much respect the concept of responsiveness. In any case, we are doing a lot of efforts recently to do so, and we do hope we can speak a bit more about it in next opportunity.
Okay.
So, as there are no more questions that I can see of, maybe I can suggest that this could be a good place to finish, and unless maybe you have something more you'd like to add, Miguel or Antonio?
I think Antonio just said a very important statement about our aims nowadays. Replication, in a sense, and we hope to do this also with different research teams. So if any of you want to work with us, we would like to do so with different samples from different places, and also, of course, to see how we can use this knowledge to help therapists improving their own practice. So that's the two lines that we are following now.
Great. Let me just pass on here the message from Catherine Reich that says, I just want to express my gratitude for this presentation and for this important work. And I would like to echo her feelings also. So
okay, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
If there is nothing else to add and no more questions, I'd love to formally thank everyone, including the presenters, organizers, and the attendees. And especially a big thank you for Miguel and Antonio for the time and for this great talk. So this webinar was recorded, so it will be available for SPR members, and they will have access to it in the SPR website soon. So you'll be informed once it is available. Miguel and Antonio, you're still receiving here thank yous from George, from Vera, from other people. So people are saying thank you very much for this fascinating presentation and hard work on your project. So I hope that this also could spark some more collaborations, international collaborations. So thank you for everyone. Yes. And I hope to see you all soon, and in Amsterdam also.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you for everyone.
Bye-bye.